I'm going to show you a new way of learning art online, which is highly interactive with tons of hands-on instruction. Our workshops are 2 weeks. It's a combination of audio recording critiques, a 3-hour live session, and tons of written support with resources like prompts, related video tutorials, recommendations for artists to look at, and lots of photos of art supplies. Welcome everybody to the gouache painting workshop. I'm so excited to work with all of you today. You guys can pick up your brushes, get started working. I believe we need more glamour shots of art supplies. You guys will find that a big part of the workshop is us comparing notes about various brands and brushes and techniques. We limit our workshops to 12 students. We welcome people of all levels. If you just ordered your supplies a week ago and you haven't picked up a brush yet, you can join our workshop. I work really hard to meet students where they're at, and that's why we keep the workshop so small so people can get really customized advice and support to where they're at. I really like that we have artists of so many different backgrounds and range of experiences. That diversity is so helpful because you get a very rich exposure to so many different ways of working and approaches to developing an artwork.
Any advice on like the structure of the bird and how to make it look like recognizably a bird?
He's got a skeleton. I mean, does that really matter that much? I mean, it's totally fine if it's something you want to do. Sometimes we really feel sort of chained to our reference photo that, oh God, I'm cheating on my reference photo if I make some adjustments. But it could be something you think about is like, oh, do I exaggerate? I mean, wouldn't this be hilarious if the bird had a giant head? Our workshops are in our Discord, and I love Discord. It's hands down the best way to have really smooth, efficient means of communication, sharing links and images, and for accessibility. I open the workshop channel 2 weeks before the live session, especially for people who are totally new to Discord. That time period is extremely important because then we get you into the Discord early. We troubleshoot any problems you might have, and I provide plenty of tech support. I do warn people that it is a major hassle if you don't get into the Discord early. This is also when you get access to our workshop guides. There is one guide for our workshops in general. There's tons of information about how to navigate Discord. And then there's another guide which is specific to the workshop. That guide has a play-by-play in terms of exactly what happens during the workshop. I compile related prompts, video tutorials, resources of artists to look at, lots of specifics about art supplies that are best suited. And that's a great way to get started because we do oftentimes have people who want to do a lot of prep work in advance of the live session. That's totally not required. You can show up at the live session and not do anything in advance. But the option's there if you want it. The week before the live session, that's when the fun stuff really happens. That is when feedback begins. I ask everybody to post 6 images of their prior work, sometimes related to the workshop topic, sometimes not. That's an opportunity for me to review your work. I do critiques as audio recordings. I can talk a lot, which means that they're usually about 2-3 minutes, and we also provide a transcript for accessibility. Hi, Lisa. You've got a really wonderful assortment of images. One thing that I really like is that you are always putting your animals in context. Oftentimes I see that people don't put a lot of effort into that, but one of my favorite pieces is actually the bird, where the bird is a small piece of that composition, but the cactus and the flower are so important in terms of really creating a scene. Same thing with the deer. Also with the horse and the raccoon, those all feel like I'm really looking at a place where the animals exist. And that really gives you a lot of possibilities in terms of creating stories. I would recommend, because you are thinking about getting more movement, maybe a good thing for you to try during the workshop would be to do some gesture drawings of animals because oftentimes it's really helpful if you have experience doing finished pieces like the ones I'm looking at here, but also gesture drawing, because the thing is, you're drawing them just so fast that there's no way you can't really get a lot of movement in there. And also, when you do gestures, you're able to pump out a whole bunch at the same time. You get a lot more experience doing different types of poses. We do have a lot of time drawing videos that have lots of animals, and some of them are 2-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute poses. That's something you could work on. It may feel like it's unrelated maybe to creating the more finished pieces with lots of color and everything, but I think it's a way of engaging with the same subject matter, but in a completely different way. And they don't have to be super short, but I think I'd recommend, I mean, if you even wanted to just do a bunch before the live session, that's great to dip your toe in the water. But again, no pressure. I mean, nobody has to do any work before the live session if you don't have time to do that. But that would be my recommendation based on what I'm seeing here. As a teacher, I find hearing a critique on voice is so different than when you read a critique. Hearing the nuances of how something is explained, the tone of voice that's being used, makes it so much easier to absorb the feedback. And you can listen to it as many times as you want and also refer to the transcript. I make lots of recommendations about what you might want to work on during the live session. I provide as much or as little structure as you want. Sometimes people have a personal project that they want to do. Other people say, I have no idea what I'm doing, give me something. And everything in between. It's so helpful when I get to see people's work before the live session. Often we'll talk about specific goals if there's something that you really want to be working on, or if you have no idea, I've got plenty of things that I can recommend in terms of goals you could set for the workshop. Sometimes people use that first week if they want to do any thumbnail sketches, if they want to gather reference images. It's not always obvious what's going to be a good reference image. I oftentimes review those in advance of the live session and explain why a particular image is better over another. A huge part of these workshops is getting to see the work that other people are making. I always say that you'll learn just as much from each other as you will from me. You get to see so much student work at incremental stages of development. And yet there's also this group goal of working towards a particular technique or a subject in the workshop. The workshop is structured so that the first 2 hours are a work session. That's where you are making your pieces and posting your progress incrementally into the chat. As the images come in, I call on everybody on voice to speak about their piece. I encourage people to just work and listen. Certainly we have the chat going on, people posting things, but sometimes it's too big of a distraction. That's why I love Discord, because after the live session, so many people will go back into the chat, scroll up and see what was talked about before. We record the live session for easy access if you want to review some of the conversations. I ask people to post their very, very early beginnings. The stuff that just looks like nothing, that you don't want anybody to see that you do, but that's where the learning is.
Trying to do thumbnails.
Okay, and how's that going?
And I was mostly trying to see what colors I might want to use to start. And then I also wanted to see if I could kind of make the pony emerge a little bit. So I think I like the one on the top right best as far as starting out. I just went in while it was still kind of wet and put in a very wet white wash for the pony to see if I could just kind of make him emerge from the fog.
I love that white wash. White isn't what a lot of people think of when it comes to doing a glaze, but I think they are so beautiful, and I've been doing some of that in my own work, and it does have that almost ethereal presence to it, which is a very good match for your photo.
I just keep trying different things because I have not been able to do this image in any media to my satisfaction yet, so.
Sometimes it feels like sharing your work online, it's always in a social media context, but these workshops, they're a learning environment. And a big part of the learning process is sharing all your stumbles, that we get to see each other fall on their face. I always remind people that you're not at that live session to impress anybody. You're not there to make a super polished portfolio piece with tons of details. It's just not possible. And that's not how you learn. You learn by trying something that you've been wanting to do, but needed a little bit of a nudge to make that happen. The live session is about process. It's about being in the moment, thinking about how your hand is moving, not to think about the final result, because that's when we stop thinking about learning and we're just worried about the outcome. Getting the feedback in real time as you're working on a piece is so valuable because somebody can get started and I can catch them early on in the process. I get to see the very early stage of your piece. You might think at the beginning of an artwork that there isn't very much to talk about, but there is. Sometimes people are going in the wrong direction. I can get them back on track. Sometimes people have no idea how to get started. And that's why it's important that I'm there in that moment. And then 20 minutes later, you post an update. I can make comments on adjustments you might want to make. And in the end of the live session, we end up with this amazing documentation of how your artwork has developed. I often look at those prior stages of my own work because I feel like I understand what I'm doing better when I have that reference. After the 2 hours of working, we take a 10-minute break, although you can take a break anytime you want because maybe you need a chocolate chip cookie in the middle of the live session. It inspires creativity. The critique portion of the workshop is 1 hour, and that's where I share my screen and I call on each person to talk on voice about their progress throughout the entire live session.
I think I still like acrylic better, but I was surprised about how far I was able to come with the gouache. Mm-hmm. I had tried gouache a few times in the past and had always been not very happy with it. But my frustration is how easy it is, of course, to working quickly to reactivate layers underneath.
So you feel like you have to work faster than you want to?
No, it's just that it's so easy that where acrylic dries quickly and you can do many layers on top. Here you're always accidentally mixing in the color underneath.
How wet is your brush? Is it really dry or is it full of water?
I've been going back and forth. I have like an old envelope so I can test to see if I'm going to be reactivating.
Another option, and this is probably better done towards the end of the piece, is to use no water at all and just go straight into that blob, put it right onto the canvas, and nothing can compete with that. Like you can pretty much always put that down and it won't really reactivate underneath. And so that is an option, and I think a big part of learning how to use any paint medium is what is the flow that comes out of your brush. Is it a really quick flow where it's like all over the place? Or is it stiff enough that it doesn't flow at all?
Well, most of my paint, or most of the gouache tends to dry out so quickly here that I'm here with a squeeze bottle and trying to keep it reactivated.
Oh, I never even thought. That must be really dramatic where you are.
They turn to rocks pretty quick, yeah.
Because I did watercolor in southern Utah and it dried so fast. I want to compare the reference photo to where you ended up. And I'm so glad you departed from the photo, which is actually sort of muddy and dirty looking. And there's nothing wrong with that. Tide pools can look whatever they want to look like. But the yellow, I sort of feel, Barry, that you're very good with yellow for some reason. Like it always does wonders for your paintings. Am I accurate there? Or I don't know. I always notice the yellow in your paintings and drawings.
Years ago, I started buying the blue earth pastels, and they sell them basically by color. So you just get a box of 27 yellows that are desaturated and then mixed also with black.
Oh.
And I did a lot of work just with one box of yellow pastels.
That's your secret.
Plus, living here, that's probably the primary color, desaturated yellows.
I guess I never thought about that because I'm looking at this earlier version and this one does have the yellow, but you really pumped up the saturation here. Like up here, this is super bright, intense yellow. So it seems like that's something that has worked really well for you long term.
Yeah, definitely not afraid of yellow.
Awesome. The last thing that I would say, probably to not rely too much on black to define things. So do you see up here at the top? I mean, I'm not saying you should never use black, but I find it's sort of dividing your piece up because there's black here. There's some around the sea urchin. I think down here, I really like this transition from the blue into the yellow because there is not so much of a dark definition, but it still feels defined. Like this little patch of this light green, that's a highlight that makes this form at the bottom pop more. But, up here, the black is sort of like overkill. So you might think about cutting back on some of that. The other part of the critique session is that I do encourage people to type comments to other people in the workshop. Sure, I'm running the workshop, but I've seen people give each other the most wonderful support, ideas, references to particular materials that I would never be able to give somebody. That's why the small scale group learning environment is incredibly helpful because you're not just getting feedback from me, you're also hearing from other people. That is not required in the workshops. However, a lot of people do it, and you'll find that it creates this wonderful momentum of learning that's so exciting. After that live stream, there's still another week where you can get more Critiques' audio recordings and transcripts. A lot of people will continue working on the piece they started in the live session. Some people will start new ones. During the live session, there's just so much to absorb. It's overwhelming. A lot of people benefit from that week to follow up. I often provide feedback by drawing on somebody's image, not because I'm telling them how to draw something, but sometimes I'm talking about one really particular part of the painting. It's difficult to figure out what's what. And in the case of anatomy and figure drawing, I always go in and I draw in particular bony landmarks in order to explain some of the construction of the muscles. Hey, Suna, what a wonderful composition. The cat, definitely the main event in this painting, but I love that you added so many things in the background. The plant, the picture frame, the painting, the upper left-hand corner. I love that we get a sense of the exterior through the windows, and yet it is not too pronounced, therefore not distracting. The cat has amazing brushwork. I love how the brushwork really follows the form of the cat. I can feel how plump his body is. And the brushwork in the tail especially, so elegant. The sense of light that is on the tail, that little tint of green is so lovely. I do think maybe you could pump up some of the highlights that are to the left of the cat's head. And it looks like there's a little bit on the leg because those areas, especially on the leg, it looks more like you're outlining the leg with the highlight. So you can make them more substantial, even if it doesn't look that way in the painting. For the chenille that you were asking about, I think the main thing is, first of all, we really need to feel like the cat is embedded in there. And I think that really starts to happen in the lower left-hand corner, but really look at those contact points where the body really sinks into that area. Sometimes part of it is if you have some of that drapery or chenille, you have it overlapping parts of the cat. Like, let's say a little bit of it overlaps in front of the legs. That will make it look like he's more sunken into the chenille. The other thing about the chenille, you don't have to paint everything. Just pick a couple spots to emphasize things. But the main thing with chenilles, oftentimes people lose track of the lighting situation. And you definitely have that, but you could maybe exaggerate some of the darks. So that way you really get a sense of shadow. Like I think especially the big shadow to the left of the body could use some of that. Hi, Suna. So exciting to see your progress on this piece. I think the textures you've done in the chenille and also on the pillows, those are such a great contrast against all of the fur that's in the cat, and especially the upper right-hand corner of the yellow chenille. I can really feel that lighting coming from the windows. That's, to me, one of the most dimensional parts of your painting. You're asking about the atmosphere in the background. I know you did go in and soften some of those edges. You probably could do it a little bit more. My feeling is when you're trying something different, it's really good to do a little bit more than you think is going to work, because so much of the time when we make changes, it's like we're taking baby steps. And when you take baby steps, it takes a really long time to get there. One thing you could try doing, I think this is gouache. I mean, you could even go in with a damp rag and just soften some of those areas. That's really what it is. It's really about the edges. So especially those two like really, really thin lines, those really pop a lot. The wider brown lines are a little bit easier because they're sort of bigger, but I think if there's anything I would soften, it would be those two very straight lines that are in the middle. You're talking about your cat being a frail old lady. She's fluffy, but she's all bones, and I know you're talking about sharpening out her hip. There's two places that I would emphasize. If you look at the bottom of the tail in your painting is very much almost a straight horizontal. And if you look at the reference image, you can see that in the lower left-hand corner, the tail is a lot lower than it is at the top of the tail. You may not actually want to go in and fix that right this second because this painting's so far along, and that's sort of a fundamental change that is a lot easier to deal with earlier in the painting. But the other thing I was going to point out is if you look at this one spot that I circled in red, you can see there's actually a little bit more of a corner. And what I would do is make that a little bit more geometric than you think you want it to be. That would probably be the spot to make more structured, because the blobbiness of the stomach, I love how you exaggerated that. Like, I don't want you to touch that part of it, but it is that one little structural part, which I think would really help you quite a bit. At the end of the 2-week period, everybody gets an email from me, which is a brief summary about their progress during the workshop. And I find that's a great time to step back and reflect upon that experience. And I also make suggestions for what people might want to think about doing in the future. Everybody who does a workshop also gets 2 free weeks in Art Club, which is another group in the Discord where you get open studios, critiques from me, and conversations about Trader Joe's Kringles. I spent years teaching in person at the college level, and I always had this assumption that teaching virtually would never measure up to teaching in person. I totally have changed my mind about that. I think it's more like apples and oranges because there are so many advantages that you get online that you would never get in person. In person, I could have a conversation with a student, and once it's over, it's gone forever. Here, we have the workshop recording, you can read the chat, we have the audio critiques. I know so many people benefit from being able to access that information later. I'm so surprised that I'm saying that. I never thought I would. It's truly extraordinary what the technology is capable of. We have workshops where we have people on 4 different continents together in a live session. That blows my mind that I could be teaching somebody who lives in Sweden and somebody who lives in China at the same time. That's why I'm so glad that we've been able to design this new learning space in a way that I really think can be just as impactful as in-person learning. To see all of our workshop offerings, go down to the video description below, and there's a link to our website.